Hey, welcome to the exchange. I want to talk about first is really the Ukraine war. We're at about a month in. What's going on actually on the ground. Also look at the MOEX, which is the Moscow exchange. See how it's trading as it opened up last week, as well as looking at USD versus Ruble trade. See how the Ruble's trading versus US dollar and how it might change in the future. So what I pull up here is the current situation on the ground. And really what we've seen is massive movements the last week or so. Kyiv itself has been basically withdrawn, retrograded by the Russians. They're actually giving up most of the city. So Kyiv itself, it's going to survive. I mean, the actual assaults are basically, up to this point, have all failed. I'm really seeing two main pushes, both in the northeast and northeast and northwest. And this northeast or northwestern push is actually really almost surrounded Hostomel, which is a major Russian kind of garrison right there. They're pushing them basically on the flanks right here, and they actually might be surrounded at this point. It's not confirmed, but they might actually be surrounded. Now, and then northeast up here, I mean, it's been massive pushbacks. I mean, they're about 50 kilometers away from Kyiv proper, and they're basically retreating at this point and/or basically digging in for a fight. But it's one of those things right now where this is not the main effort right now. It's almost like a sideshow. You're hearing rumors right now of pinch Russian forces basically pushing back into Belarus itself to basically refit. And they've suffered horrible casualties across the board up in the Kyiv area. We've seen counterattacks in Sumy by the Ukrainian forces. Again, those are defeating major Russian forces that are scattered throughout those areas. Kharkiv is being bombed, but no major change in the lines there. There was earlier fears beginning this month that basically the Ukrainian forces would be surrounded in the Donbass regions, basically a push down south and a push up north by the Russians actually would surround that kind of Ukrainian force in there, but that's actually been stalled out entirely. That force basically now is at a standstill. Now, obviously, the big story we've had in the last 2-3 weeks has been Mariupol. I mean, it's surrounded, it's still holding on. The Russians can really control the eastern side of it right now, which they're pushing into the city proper. This right here, eastern area, is mostly industrial parks, kind of commercial areas. But again, they're pushing down actual neighborhoods, actual residential areas around Mariupol itself, which we'll see how long it holds on for. I mean, time will tell in that aspect. We saw obviously the missile strike against the Russian basic carrier right there, or Russian cargo carrier right there. The big, actually exciting part for the Ukrainian forces is actually really in the southwest. So Kherson itself, which is a major city by Crimea, has actually been recaptured by the Ukrainian forces. Not entirely, but it's most of the way there to being recaptured. I mean, the question is, after this Kherson's captured, they either push east towards Mariupol or push down south and basically seize Crimea, which is Russian territory as of 2014. So that's really the option there. So obviously, if they push east towards Mariupol, help kind of relieve the city, put pressure on forces of Russian forces defending Mariupol, the Mariupol kind of outskirts, or potentially push down south to Crimea. And if Ukrainian forces are in Crimea, I mean, that's almost like hey, you cannot deny that. That's a huge loss for the Russian forces. So there's really pros and cons there if they have the combat power on the Ukrainian side, but we'll see what happens next, even 48 hours, what's going to happen in that aspect. But yeah, that's just my thoughts basically about a month into this war. I mean, really, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with this Ukrainian war because, I mean, the Russian losses have been about 15,000 are killed in action, roughly 50,000 probably wounded in action, lost, prisoners of war, etc. I mean, these are just massive numbers. So you think about a total invasion force of 190,000. If you have 60,000 or so basically out of action, about a third of your force, I mean, that's just massive numbers. It's not sustainable. And that's really what we've seen in the past, even 48 hours is basically fall back from Kyiv as the Russian forces, they can't sustain an actual frontal assault anymore. And really the focus right now is in the Donbass and Mariupol, kind of the Crimea Peninsula down south too, because it really, as the forces get thinner and thinner and thinner, they have to basically unify or kind of focus their fronts as much as they can be. But even another week or two from now, I mean, the Mariupol front and the Crimea front, I mean, it could be burnout. It could be a lack of forces there to actually maintain offensive combat operations. I mean, maybe even defensive combat operations. But I mean, look at overall combat effectiveness right now. It's probably about 30 to 40% for the Russian forces, or degraded. So they're at about 60% combat power. I mean, if it falls below 50%, I mean, it might be that point. You might see an army collapse in the field. Now, let's have the actual financials. This is the MOEX graph, which you're not familiar with the MOEX. Is basically the Moscow exchange. It's almost like the Dow 30 we have in the U.S. Overseas, in Russia, they have the MOEX. This is also internationally traded too. And really soon to see since the start of this war, I mean, it's almost dropped in half from roughly about 3,800 down to 2,400. The low is right about 2,000 or so. It has recovered quite a bit, and part of that recovery is just it's not as bad as bleak as it was once before potentially, but also too it's lightly traded though too, so it's still partially controlled by the Russian government. It's not a free market trading system right now. So basically, foreign investors cannot trade, they cannot sell. All sales are basically approved by the central exchange itself there. So basically, if you're a Russian insider, Russian citizen, or oligarch, you still cash your money out. Whereas if you're a lower income Russian or potentially international investor or potentially hedge fund investor, like you're basically at this point still pretty screwed until those regulations drop off. But as you can see here, obviously, I mean, it's just been a massive decline. So imagine the S&P 500 dropping 40% in a month. I mean, it's just horrible declines. I mean, this entire people's savings or basically their life savings basically evaporating with the Russian economy. So I'll pull up here. This is basically the components of the basically Russian MOEX. It's about 50 different equities across the board. The column I look at here is actually the year-to-date numbers. So what you see right here, about 2/3 are being traded, still 1/3 are still not being traded. I mean, it's just been massive losses. So I mean, you're seeing like 50%, 30%, 59%. You're seeing some greens though, like Gazprom is a oil and gas company. Obviously, as oil and gas goes up, they obviously their revenue goes up too, or hypothetically will go up. Foss Agro is a fertilizer company, so like again, you've seen all those fertilizer shortages globally. I mean, Russia's a major producer of fertilizer, so obviously people willing to pay more, supply and demand, prices go up, they make more money. VSMO or actually Akron is another fertilizer company. VSMO is a commodities and metal exchange company. So like nickel, you hear about a lot in the news right now. I mean, they're getting massive tailwinds from that, and that's why they shot up so much in their equity stock. But again, across the board, though, I mean, it's pretty ugly. I mean, it's more or less. I mean, if you're a Russian citizen, I mean, this is pretty much a dead exchange until it opens up entirely. But the big fear is as international traders come back on board and are able to trade again, if ever potentially, I mean, it's going to absolutely tank this market as foreign flight basically pulls out their capital and be like, hey, it's not worth the risk. The investments aren't worth the risk, and it's going to cause long-term pain for the Russian economy and for the MOEX in general. So I also want to highlight the Russia ruble versus the U.S. dollar. So this is a graph. So basically saying for every U.S. dollar, you can buy right now 106 Russian rubles, which again, pre-war, it's gone quite a bit. It's in the low 80s, high 70s area. But I mean, it's been up and down all over the place. Now, the thing to notice here is when you see this big spike up in basically early March timeframe as the ruble is devaluing and there's big fears of capital flight issues and everything else too, it's really come down quite a bit. It's at that 106 range. I know in an early video, I said, hey, this is probably a 200 plus or 200 to 1, 300 to 1 kind of trading ratio if it was like a free market economy. But I mean, there's been massive capital controls by the Russian central banks and Putin himself trying to keep basic capital rubles, basically the value in-house, and ensure they can support the actual overall budget itself. Now, you heard that news stories about like, hey, the petrodollar contracts, basically for as Germans or France buys like basic oil and gas from Russia, he wants them to pay now in rubles, which they decline that obviously. But the big thing is he basically creates buying pressure, buying power on the Russian ruble itself, which will actually help appreciate the Russian ruble as they're trying to for the whole economy right now. But I mean, that's one of the big fears he has is if this number tanks too far, basically, and by tank, I mean the number goes straight to the moon up there, like 200 to 1, 300 to 1. I mean, it's going to hurt Russian citizens, and they cannot deny that. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like you can control the battlefield, you can control propaganda and everything else too, but the actual trading Forex rates, you cannot control that. So if it goes too bad or too negative too fast, I mean, it's just going to get out there, and people are going to know that. It's going to be basically a fact of life. But I expect this basically capital controls are lifted in the near future, or even post-war potentially. This might come down a little bit further though, but I mean, I think the long-term trend is really going to up and to the right at that point too. I mean, a year from now, I mean, this might be trading 200 to 1, because, I mean, as capital controls come off, because really the Russian economy for this war has been absolutely just thrown under the bus. I mean, it's going to tank. It's just a matter of how far it's going to go and what's actually going to stop it. And the big fear is, I mean, as Russian investments, both internally and externally, I mean, if those come back at all, I mean, it could be decades before foreign exchange or foreign investors come back in the Russian economy, just because the fear there and the fear of controls there. But yeah, something definitely to watch. I mean, I think the graph right now, I mean, even though it shows a 106, I mean, it's not a real price at that point. So really, I think the real price is probably up here in the 150 range if you took away all the controls right now. Hey, obviously be sure to hit that like button down below if you liked the video, and obviously sub to the channel overall, and that's the exchange.